Okay, so it's summertime for sure here in Texas, and that means it is time for planting the fall tomatoes. So it is time to get your fall tomatoes in the ground if you want tomatoes for the fall. Summer's here. It's way too hot for any fruit to set or to grow on your current tomato plants. This year we've had a big problem with our tomato plants actually. But I'll give you more information up in a second about that. So what we've got here is our area all cleaned up that we're going to put our new tomatoes. So let's check out what we are going to plant for our fall tomatoes. Okay, so we're out here early this morning, 8 o'clock, before this heat starts to set here in Dallas. Close to 100 degrees lately. Let's check out what fall tomatoes we're going to try to grow. We were just at the local nursery here in North Haven. They had just got these in this weekend for the fall tomatoes, fresh off the shelf here. We got super fantastic. These are some nice looking tomato plants they had. So Solar Fire, which is a real good variety to grow in the heat. And I always like to grow Cherokee tomato. So here's a Cherokee purple tomato. We've got an early girl. This one will be ready, as it says, 52 to 62 days. That's the fastest setting growing tomato you can get. That's always a good one to grow. Grape tomato. We got one grape tomato here. I like the grape tomatoes. And then we got the Celebrity, very good choice always to have in the garden. And a Better Boy. This one is a Better Boy tomato. Looks real nice. And this is the Indigo Rose. I tried to grow this in the spring, but we had a late frost and it died, and I couldn't find it to buy anymore. So we're going to try to grow this in the fall. This is almost like a black tomato. You slice it open, it's really dark red color. Almost looks black, purplish color. And then they had a couple of bigger tomato plants. Of course, I can't resist the bigger tomato plants. This says this is a Defiant. Never heard of this variety before. We'll try to grow it and see what happens. And then one more variety in the bigger pot. Look at that nice big tomato plant to get started early. And this variety is called Amelia. Matures 60 to 80 days, extra large fruit. So that's the Amelia. And this Defiant, these two I've never heard of, these varieties. So we'll see how those turn out. So there's our tomatoes. We got 10 varieties. We're gonna get planted and get ready for our fall garden. All right, so before I talk about our newly planted fall tomatoes, let's talk about what happened in the spring here. We had, well, extremely bad luck with our tomatoes. After doing some research and talking to some people and whatnot, I've already pulled them all up, but they were pretty much died. We only got about 2 or 3 tomatoes from the vines. I left one plant here, it looked pretty healthy. So I left that one in the ground. I wanted to go ahead and pull them all up if they had any disease or anything. I didn't want that to spread onto our new tomatoes that I just planted for the fall. But let me give you a few tips what I learned from this spring tomatoes. One is talking to a local Texas gardener and horticulture expert here in Dallas. He said they basically look hungry, and it may be because the nitrogen is tied up in the soil. He said it happens when a lot of activity, actively decaying organic matter, such as fairly fresh compost, which we added early in the well, before the spring. We added quite a bit of compost to here, so obviously the compost was probably not the best. So what he suggested is rework by adding several inches of the peat moss, pine bark mulch, or maybe an inch or two of expanded shell, which we already have expanded shell we've added couple years ago. You only need to add that one time. Helps with our clay soil, they say. But so one theory is the compost was not aged enough. Another problem that could have been from our tomatoes is also the extreme weather we've had early in the spring. We had some late freezes, extreme cold, and then warmed up and then back down to cold. I don't know if that was necessarily the problem. Also, another odd problem I noticed is when I pulled them up, they were not in the ground very deep. My wife had planted them for me after a freeze. She replanted all the tomatoes. But I noticed pulling them up, they were barely in the ground. So one tip to make sure you plant the tomatoes deep. You cannot plant tomatoes too deep. That's one thing you can plant deeper than the pot. So take home from 2013 spring vegetable garden. Make sure you used a well-aged compost. Protect it from freeze as much as frost as much as you can. 2, 3, plant them deeper in the ground. So that's our experience from this season. I've never had such a horrible time with tomatoes. We usually have loads of tomatoes, so I was not sure what happened, but that's what I think the culprit was this year. So we're gonna go with the fall tomatoes, see what happens. Here's our fall tomatoes. What I've done here is I worked in some peat moss here. Let me show you what we got here. We got some peat moss. Also spread out some organic fertilizer here. It's a 5:3:2 ratio organic fertilizer that I spread out. And also we had a terrible problem with ants this year, so I put out some ant deterrent, ant preventative, and tilled all that in. And hopefully we should have some good looking fall tomatoes. There's a short window time to plant tomatoes here in Texas for the fall. This is towards the end of June now, and it takes, between 60 to 90 days for fruit to set or to start producing. But these tomatoes will not produce in these extreme heat. So if you have tomatoes right now growing from the spring and they're not making any more tomatoes, a couple of things is because the nighttime temperatures are over 70 degrees. If the nighttime temperatures are over 70 degrees, they're not going to set fruit. You can water as much as you want, but you're not going to have any tomatoes setting. Another problem is it's too hot. If the temperature is above 95 or 85 to 90 degrees, the pollen, they say, is unviable. I don't know what that means, but if it's too hot, the tomatoes are not going to produce fruit also. So another problem we have here in Dallas is humidity. They say also if it's very humid, we've been having 60 to 80 degree, 60 to 80% humidity here. It's very humid lately. So the humidity also prevents the pollen from falling. So there's a few tips on growing tomatoes, spring, fall tomatoes. I've also, we tilled all that stuff into the soil. Looks really nice there. And then on each hole, I added a little bit of this fertilizer from the North Haven Gardens here. This is a 465, just a little bit for each tomato plant we put down. Just a little bit in each hole. So this stuff says plus calcium, sulfur, great for vegetables, derived from feather meal, fish meal, blood meal, bone meal, potassium, chloride, is that what it says? And gypsum. So I put a little bit of that in each hole. I used this a couple years ago and it was really good, so added that to the tomatoes. Also, as I planted, now I just need to water them in. So there's the update on our tomatoes. Hopefully we'll have a much better harvest. Last year our fall tomatoes we planted way too late, so they didn't have time to produce fruit. This year we're starting early, getting a head start on the fall tomatoes. So we're hoping for much better luck. Got them, as you can see, planted much deeper in the ground. If you noticed how tall they were in the pots earlier, they're way down deep in the ground so they can find the water, as it's going to be very hot for the next couple of months here. So thanks for watching. This area over here, I'm probably gonna pull these stakes out, move them over, and later on we'll put some more fall vegetables in this area.